Okay, and do a nice graceful fade out. Okay, thank you. Thank you to everyone, and thank you so much for your patience. Sorry, we had a technical glitch with the Eventbrite, and we couldn't open the Zoom room until the meeting was supposed to start. So my name is Kathy Mastati, and I'm going to begin with my version of a land acknowledgement. So to begin, I would like to start by sharing a link to an article that I found recently that is called, here we are, it's called 5 Big Lessons on Reconciliation and Community Finance by Suzanne Faiza, who's a knowledge lead for Tapestry Community Capital. And I'd also like to put in the chat, can you give me, oh, okay. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see these links in the chat? Yes, thank you. Okay, great. So, and the way I came across that is at March 7th meeting of TEAC, Rose mentioned that she had attended a presentation by Tapestry Community Capital, where she learned about a key solutions group, a First Nations managed nonprofit social enterprise in Manitoba that incorporates Indigenous teachings and values in their management process. And a Key Energy worked with Peguis First Nation and Fisher Creek First Nation in Manitoba to train community members how to install geothermal energy systems in their communities. So I'm also going to put in the chat a link to a video showing how they accomplished this very interesting goal. And I'll add one more link. It's called Making Heat Pumps Ordinary, the Key Energy Story. And it's a link from National Observer. So I encourage you to, after our presentation this evening, I encourage you to explore those links. Thank you very much. And now I would like to turn it over to Kyle. Kyle, please go ahead.
All right, thank you, Kathy. So I want to welcome you all on behalf of the Toronto East End Climate Collective, also known as TEAC. This is TEAC's 3rd event in our speaker series on geothermal and thermal energy networks. TEAC is a small core group with a membership of a few hundred. We try to understand the causes of the climate crisis and advocate for constructive responses. Buildings are a large source of greenhouse gas. The choices we make in heating and cooling buildings play a pivotal role in addressing the climate crisis. Tonight we have Peter Tabuns, MPP for Toronto-Danforth, and John Stephenson, Director at the Boltzmann Institute, for a discussion about thermal energy and possible pathways towards achieving sustainable buildings. In a moment, I will introduce Peter Tabuns, who will speak for a few minutes, and then I will introduce John Stephenson, who has a presentation for us. But first, some housekeeping. We're recording the meeting to post on our TEAC YouTube channel. We ask that attendees remain muted. After the presentations, there will be a Q&A using the Zoom chat, so please type your questions into the chat, prefaced by a letter Q, and feel free to type your questions as they come up for you, perhaps during the presentation. Rose, our chat moderator, will voice your questions to our guests during the Q&A. And now for some background about Peter Tabuns. Peter Tabuns has been Toronto-Danforth's MPP since 2006. He's the opposition critic for energy and climate action. From 1999 to 2004, he was executive director of Greenpeace Canada, where he advocated for environmental protections and the adoption of the Kyoto Protocol. He was also Jack Layton's senior climate advisor. Before that, Peter was a Toronto City Councillor. He was instrumental in establishing the city's Better Buildings Partnership, a not-for-profit collaboration of property owners working to improve the energy efficiency of commercial buildings. He also chaired the Toronto Board of Health. We are glad to have Peter here to share his extensive experience in environmental advocacy. Peter, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Kyle. And I want to thank the whole of the Toronto East End Climate Collective for inviting me to speak this evening. Before I go any further, I want to note the presence of Richard Gilbert here. Richard is one of the big pioneers of, what can I say, energy efficiency, district energy, trying to deal with climate, and frankly, way back in the day, the ozone hole crisis. It's very good to see you here, Richard. It's really a pleasure. So I appreciate the introduction. I should just note as well that in my time on City Council in the 90s, I was one of the people who sat on the Toronto District Heating Corporation Board of Directors. And Richard, I think you had preceded me on this, which provides heat at the time to many of the major buildings in downtown Toronto, including Toronto City Hall, including the hospitals on University Avenue, energy to U of T campus downtown, and to Queen's Park. And in the 90s, we were having substantial discussions about how we would go beyond heating to providing cooling. And there were a variety of suggestions, one of which always intrigued me. Toronto Hydro wanted to build a loop through the downtown that would carry an ice slurry, effectively a giant slushy that would circulate through the city, cooling it down. But in fact, in the end, where we went was deep lake water cooling, taking water from deep in Lake Ontario, bringing it over Toronto Island, using it to cool water through a heat exchanger, and that cooled water in turn circulating through the downtown, frankly, as far up as Wellesley Street, to cool buildings. A really huge development to reduce electrical demand in the city of Toronto. We face, as all of you who would be interested in the climate issue, huge issues with moving away from natural gas to provide ourselves with heating in this province. In Ontario, 25% of emissions come from building energy use. That's residential and commercial, mostly heating, mostly gas. That is an awful lot of gas, a lot of energy. And given the pace of change with the world climate, we're going to have to move pretty quickly to displace all of this. Most households, about 60% of their energy use is from natural gas. And to get to zero emissions, we're going to have to electrify the residential sector. We're going to need a lot of energy efficiency. And there are big questions, big projects before us. And I'm very pleased that the Boltzmann Institute has been working on this whole issue of how do we actually move away from fossil fuel heating, energy provision. And it makes complete sense to me that district energy would be a significant part of the solution to the problems we face. My colleague, John Stephenson, will talk about the technical issues, but I want to say to all of you, it's very clear that there are a lot of opportunities and approaches hiding in plain sight that we need to take advantage of. I'll note back in the 90s, a friend of mine worked for what was then Ontario Hydro, doing energy efficiency recommendations to large commercial buildings. And one building in the center core at King and Bay was so hot in the winter from the heat of people working in the building and from the machinery that they actually ran their air conditioners right through the winter. So in January and February, they would have their air conditioning going full tilt to cool the interior of the building. And she quite rightly pointed out to them that if they simply turned off the air conditioners and sucked in the cold air from the outside, they could solve their overheating problem and substantially reduce their energy bill. And she was right. They could do it, they did do it, and they did very well. And similarly, I believe, and John will speak to this in far greater detail and with far greater knowledge than me, that there's a lot of opportunity to harvest waste heat from building operations, from data centers, from kitchen operations, so that we can heat our buildings without having to burn gas or any other fossil fuel. We're going to need every calorie of heat. We should not be wasting it. We shouldn't be casting it out into the air. We should be using it, recycling it into our buildings so that we can dramatically reduce the amount of fossil fuels that we use, that we need. And we should be using that recovery of recycling of heat, ground source heat as well, to move things forward. Not only will it advance our climate goals, our air pollution and health goals, but I think it will substantially advance our economic goals. People may know that Ontario now spends about $14 billion a year, depending on the price of oil and gas, on fossil fuels imported from outside the province. Only about 1% of the fossil fuels used in Ontario are actually extracted here. So every calorie of heating that we secure from our own resources through recycling heat or extracting it from the ground means that more money stays in our economy. And I think that's clearly the biggest economic benefit, but I want to note another one. If we're going to make that transition to electrification from fossil fuels, we're going to have to think about different ways to electrify. We can build large central power plants, have them connected to power users by large transmission lines. We can have distributed energy. But I have to say, to the extent that you use locally generated or harvested energy, you avoid spending tens of billions of dollars on transmission lines. And that savings is one that obviously could be used to actually put in place that local infrastructure to deal with our energy needs. This also, I believe, increases our resilience. The reality is that extreme weather is going to make it harder and harder for us to keep the lights on or keep them on consistently. In 2022, Ottawa had 2 events when the power grid was damaged, the derecho, and then another one later in the year. Thousands of people were without power for weeks at a time. The Ontario Energy Board did a study this past year on electrical system vulnerabilities, and it is a very interesting document to read. You can find it at the OEB website. But one of their substantial recommendations was the hardening of electrical supply to water and transit systems. I think that says volumes about the scale of the risk that the Ontario Energy Board and their consultants have identified. So we're in a position, I believe, through the development of local heat distribution grids, through the use of deep investment in energy efficiency and demand management, to increase the ability of communities to get through extreme weather conditions without loss of heating to those communities. There are huge opportunities. We need to look at them, we need to evaluate them, and then we need to implement them if we're going to stabilize the climate and survive the changes that we've already unleashed. I thank you for the opportunity to make opening comments. I turn it back to you, Kyle.
All right, thank you, Peter. I think you're going to find a very receptive audience here for your ideas.
That was my guess.
Okay, so I'm just going to give a few words now of introduction to John Stephenson. So John co-founded and is a director of the Boltzmann Institute, a nonprofit research and education organization working towards climate neutrality for 2050. He authored the recent publication, Heating GTHA Buildings with Zero Emissions, an Affordable Road. And prior to that, John was director of project development for FVB Energy Inc., where he contributed to the planning and construction of more than 25 new district energy systems across the country over a period of 15 years. He has been the manager of generation projects with Toronto Hydro and a senior business development engineer with Ontario Hydro. He has served as president of the Canadian District Energy Association, as a director of the International District Association, and he was also the Toronto West chapter leader for Citizens Climate Lobby. And now that I've given a bit of background about his many contributions to sustainable energy, I pass the virtual floor over to him. So John, go ahead when you're ready.
Hello, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm going to use quite a few slides, so I'm just going to share my screen here. And I didn't get a chance to, so I hope you can all see what we'll see down 2 pathways. And there a thumbs up for that?
Yep.
All right. So that's the title of a research project that the Boltzmann Institute is undertaking with a financial contribution from the Government of Canada. And along with McMaster Institute of Energy Studies and FEB Energy Inc., and we have a report due by the end of the next quarter. But, you know, my view has shifted somewhat since I wrote the proposal for this about 2 years ago. I've grown less sanguine about the realistic prospects for the first pathway, which is a pathway that Canada is on, relying almost entirely on electrification. I just don't see this as I don't see this as working as many hope. And why would it? Why would the majority of building owners fork out large lumps of cash, which they doubtless have other uses for, to change their heating systems when they don't have to? And the alternative pathway, an alternative pathway would involve more district energy than is apparently imagined by the senior levels of government. And not only for new development, which is happening, or public buildings, it's happening, but crucially for existing private buildings, which is largely not happening, as far as I can see. Now, as we heard at the last session, the municipalities are doing a lot, but they need more support from the senior levels of government. And there's little prospect of that unless you do something about it. And I'll give you an example of what I mean, of the kind of attitude that I'm referring to. The final report of the Electrification and Energy Transition Panel, entitled Ontario's Clean Energy Route, included an appendix entitled What Have We Heard? Noting they'd heard lots of good things about district energy, but none of it was carried into any of their 29 recommendations. The closest was to recommend comprehensive energy plans. Now, I don't know what use a non-comprehensive energy plan would be, but there was no explicit mention of district energy. Nada. It talked explicitly about electricity, natural gas, building envelope improvements, hydrogen, carbon capture and storage. But district energy, nothing. It doesn't exist. It doesn't appear to exist as far as the Ontario government is aware. Yet, there are 47 district energy systems in Ontario. No CCS projects that I've heard of. So this panel seemed curiously detached from reality on the ground. And then there is Ontario's cost-effective energy pathway study. As far as I can see, it's been done by modelers who don't know anything about district energy. That sounds a bit arrogant on my part, but I have been in this business 39 years, and I believe I do know personally most of the people in Ontario who know district energy, and they don't work for that company. So I'm not expecting they will identify district energy as a cost-effective energy pathway. And we've been trying to communicate with the ministry to remedy that, and you should also. Something different must be done because emissions from buildings are going in the wrong direction, as documented by the Toronto Atmospheric Fund, TAF. And the National Inventory Report reveals similar for both Ontario and Canada. Some of you may recall the first set of Transform TO strategies unanimously adopted by the city in 2017, 7 years ago. This transformation was supposed to reduce emission, but evidently it hasn't. Let's be honest. Toronto has done a lot, but please note that the Toronto Green Standard target only applies to new buildings, and that just prevents emissions from rising. To reduce emissions, we have to decarbonize existing buildings. Now, the recently issued annual Transformation TO Net Zero Progress and Accountability Report does note that the biggest impact by far would come from emission performance standards, and that is a bylaw is being developed for council. Now, one thing we could do is support that bylaw if it needs any support. And also, I think the Ontario government needs to stand behind the city of Toronto. If the city is going to go out to these big corporations and say, look, we want you to go down to zero emissions, I think they should have a big brother helping them on their side, so to speak. And Toronto is just one city. Every city in Canada needs to get to zero emissions. And I'll have some further comments on the useful roles that the province and feds might play. The Independent Electricity System Operator doesn't believe a transformation is underway. as revealed by this figure from their latest annual planning outlook. The dark blue dashed line is their forecast of the winter peak, going to 35 gigawatts in 2050. But the top line in yellow dashes depicts the projection of the winter peak in their P2D report, December 22, which assumed a heat pump in every building. And that went to 60 gigawatts. Now, this is quite revealing because the difference of about 25 gigawatts, it is mostly, not all, but mostly, what they would be estimated would be caused by electrification throughout the province, electrification of heating, building heating, which they currently evidently don't believe is going to happen. But if it did happen, we're talking 25 gigawatts, but they say, to quote the IESO, they say the transition to net zero will not materialize without drastic changes in policy, technology, and customer behavior. And I won't disagree that drastic changes are needed. It's the precise nature that concerns me. Should it involve more subsidies from relatively poor taxpayers like me and you to relatively rich building owners to improve their buildings? This is like Robin Hood in reverse. Or should it include expanding the electricity system another 25 gigawatts, 6 Darlingtons? How would that help keep energy costs down? And is it likely to happen? Or is there a more practical alternative? I think it's time to get real and look at concrete steps some folks are taking. You're probably aware what the University of Toronto has done recently at King's College Circle. They tore up the grass and drilled about 370 boreholes, some of them about 250 meters deep, and built an underground car park. And this photograph was taken last year, and now you can walk through this car park. And on your way to the elevator, you will be able to, through viewing windows, see mechanical equipment called industrial heat pump / chillers, which are also known as ground source heat pumps. So in this case, the ground is not the source of the heat. It only stores the heat, which comes partly from buildings themselves using this equipment as chillers, plus waste heat from the flue gas heat recovery in the steam plant. Now, my rough calculation is about 40 gigawatt hours per year will be stored in this huge underground thermal battery. Come winter, the same equipment will be used as heat pumps to take the heat, extract the heat back out of the ground and into a new hot water system. And you can see the hot water pipes if you walk through the parking garage. So this is a new 4th generation district heating system for existing buildings. Proves it can be done physically, but it's not private buildings. I'll get to that in a minute. Yet it does speak to what can be done to old infrastructure and old buildings throughout the entire country. The principle being demonstrated by the U of T here is that thermal energy storage can enable various forms of waste heat, even if they're constant throughout the year or even counter-seasonal, to be stored for use in winter when it's needed. Now, cities need a lot of heat in winter. And there's just no way electricity can be stored from summer to winter. Solar PV is of little use in electrifying heating because electric batteries are nowhere close to economic for seasonal storage. To do the equivalent of this with electric batteries would cost about 16 billion US dollars. So let's have a quick look at different kinds of thermal storage. Some of this may be old hat to some of you, but it may be new to you that there are these different methods that are in use in Canada and around the world. There's the boreholes that we've just seen for seasonal. There are tanks, which is normally diurnal, daily. It can follow the daily load profiles. This is what Enwave have at the well. And Markham District Energy have, but theirs is an above ground tank. And that helps optimize their combined heat and power unit, the type of thing Peter was talking about, the local generation source, which has less net emissions than the big gas plants on the margin right now. There are other seasonal storages, pit thermal storage and aquifer thermal storage. And we know we do have aquifers below Toronto. So we're talking about distributed energy resources. You see, the U of T have boilers for backup. So their industrial heat pumps, which I imagine will draw a couple of megawatts each, are a flexible load. They could, with the backup, they could be shut down at peak times. And this would be very useful to the electricity system. And because they don't need to operate right on the system peaks, they don't actually require significant expansion of the entire electricity system. I mean, yes, they need the electrical service going to that specific spot, but they don't impact the entire electricity system, as I showed you earlier, with the would be impacted by having heat pumps in every single building in the province. You may have heard the term DER in reference to solar PV, but that won't provide capacity during winter peaks like a heat network would, either by shutting off the heat pumps or starting up the small CHP, combined heat and power, also known as cogeneration, which the U of T also has, as do Enwave, York University, Regent Park, Merritt Village, Ontario Tech, Markham District Energy, and many others. Now, the IESO's APO makes it very clear there are pains actually to state that Toronto, in particular, is greatly in need of DER when they shut down the gas plants, or should I say, if they should shut down the gas plants at this rate. But specifically, we have the Portland's Energy Center, York Energy Center, Halton Hills, Galway, and the cogen at the airport. Now, getting sufficient power into Toronto has been problematic for as long as I can remember, but it would be even more challenging when they phase out those gas plants. But that would be more likely, we can make that more likely if we have more distributed energy resources letting the heat network support the electricity system in the ways I've indicated. Now, last week, David McMillan from the city showed us this graph, which I very well remember from many years ago, and I stole a copy somewhere along the way. The Energy Efficiency Office, as it was called at that time, identified 27 locations in the city. Scarborough City Centre was one, Etobicoke Civic Centre was another, that had or could be envisaged to have anchor customers suitable for starting new district energy system. 27 nodes, I believe there's more now. Now, you may wonder, harking back to what the U of T did, couldn't other owners of existing buildings do something like the U of T? I don't mean exactly what the U of T did, but something like that. And I'm talking about a who's who of commercial real estate in North America here. There's the Oxfords, the Cadillac Fairviews, the Morgouts, the Quadrille, etc. No law of physics prevents it, but it would cost them a lot of money up front, and they don't have to. The simple payback of 15 years is probably not good enough for the private sector. They're just not going to do it. until the government tells them to. And saying that really hurts me. It runs counter to my preference. I saw Lynn joining. I'd rather they made a business decision informed by carbon pricing. But it doesn't look like that's happening. Now, if told by government that they must go to zero, that regulations may be imminent, their first thought might be standalone electrification, running the numbers. They would find ground source heat pumps would be better, but then they would realize that would cost a lot of money up front, difficult to recover through rent, and that might lead them to realize they could get clean heating and cooling for no upfront cost to them by signing long-term service agreements with capable deep pockets district energy developers. And such long-term contracts are like gold to investors and bankers. That's why the CEO of Canada Infrastructure Bank, Aaron Coren, said, "We love district energy." And why a couple of pension funds bought Enwave. It's a safe, predictable revenue stream forever. And multiple contracts lower the risk to lenders, meaning the DE developers can get lower cost financing than the customers could if they did the job themselves. And the cost of energy from these capital intensive projects is very sensitive to the cost of financing. This is a way to help keep energy costs down. And the key is a policy framework making district energy service virtually an offer they can't refuse. And we could talk about that in the discussion period. I could talk about that for a long time, actually. Now, but before concluding, I'm coming towards the end now, but I just must debunk a false assertion I saw in an email that low-grade heat available locally is very limited compared to total demand. Just the opposite. There is a lot more than just heat rejected from cooling. But an appreciation of that requires awareness of what can be done with thermal storage, because the availability of waste heat is not usually coincident with demand. Now, this diagram is from an IEA guide to district heating operators, shows how they can expand and also decarbonize, shutting down this and adding that. There are over 200 district heating companies in Canada which could do both of these things, expand and decarbonize. For a start, top left, all communities receive more energy as sunlight than they need for heating. But you've probably heard that solar thermal is only good for swimming pools. That is in the absence of seasonal heat storage. If you don't know anything about seasonal heat storage, then you don't kind of think solar collectors are much use. Furthermore, many cities in Canada are on lakes, which are themselves gigantic solar collectors and storage vessels with natural thermal stratification, such that a large baseload could be extracted using equipment similar to what the U of T are using. And then thermal storage could be added to follow the load. Now, moving down here, not every community has waste heat from industry, but many have water treatment plants. Toronto has 4, with warm effluent year-round, and they all have sewers and buildings with cooling systems. Some rejecting heat year-round, including supermarkets and data centers, which are spreading like wildfires. Now, surplus power is something people perhaps don't think of, and it could be accessed by any community given industrial air source heat pumps with, of course, thermal energy storage. It's sounding like a broken record here. And there will always be lots of surplus power in Ontario. Monetizing this otherwise wasted resource would help keep energy costs down, which the government wants, or so I've heard. you are invited to our study tour. I think there's a few places left, although they're rapidly filling, in which you could learn more about all of this. We're going to visit 11 district heating systems that are all expanding and decarbonizing in 7 countries with slightly different approaches, and we will have a jolly good time cruising the Baltic Sea during what I'm told is a beautiful part of the year. I should hasten to say none of this has been paid for by the government, although our research will benefit from the learning. It's all on our own time and expenses. If you're interested in coming, to give you an idea of the cost, mine has totaled $6,700 Canadian. That's flights, hotel, and cruise, but it could be less. If you get someone to go with you to share a cabin, don't spend 2 nights in a hotel in Amsterdam. Not absolute, and don't include a side trip to Yorkshire. This is not to educate engineers. Engineers in Canada can already design and build heat networks. They have built quite a few, actually. But what we need for much broader expansion is better and broader understanding of the marketing, financing, regulatory, legal, political, business and community and governance and ownership issues involved in getting them started to serve existing private buildings. A good way to get that, talk face to face with folks what done it. And with that invitational, I'll end there, except to let you know there are links to all the references that I relied on slide 12 of the deck, which I believe will be made available to you.
Thank you so much, John. That was pretty amazing. And from what you have said, you could go on. So I'm just going to say that before we begin the Q&A, I want to give Peter a moment if he wants to respond. And then after that, we'll go to the Q&A. And I think then you'll be able to talk to some of the questions that come up. So Peter, do you want to speak for a moment?
Very briefly, John, that was a very impressive presentation. I have no doubt that there's tons of waste heat out there that can be utilized. And I think that if the province of Ontario is not talking to you seriously, that's a substantial problem. I'm aware of the panel. I think you were referring to the Dunsky report that the panel was basing its thoughts on. I haven't seen that report yet, but I think that you've made an excellent argument for, at the absolute minimum, doing the assessments of district energy, the capture of waste heat, and utilizing it to displace fossil fuels. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And now, everyone, I'm going to pass over to Rose, who's our chat moderator, to move on to the Q&A part of this meeting.
Hi, everyone. So if the audience has any questions, please put them in the chat. If you put a Q in front of your question, that will be easier to scan when comments flow. I could share, I don't see any questions right now, but maybe I could start off by asking about one of my favorite policies, which is heat network zones, which I gather have gotten a head start in the UK. Any comments on those?
Well, that's one thing we're going to be looking into when we go there. I didn't mention on that tour, Richard and I are actually also going to Leeds, home of my alma mater, to visit the company that runs the district energy centre system there, among other places in the UK. And that's definitely on my agenda to see what they think of that. But I mean, you can see the logic in it. If there are areas which can be determined to be definitely in the public interest, in everyone's best interest, to connect to waste heat and achieve efficiencies, lower greenhouse gas emissions, moderate the impact on the grid, save all ratepayers' costs. And the problem is that the district energy development companies never know for sure how easy or difficult it is going to be to sign up customers. I mean, I can tell you this from experience. It is difficult to sign up district energy customers to those long-term agreements. And so they don't try. And so they don't even look at it. But and the other thing is they could be developed in consultation with the building owners, of course. You know, the city is good at consulting with people. They're going to consult with the building owners about their emissions performance standards. I mean, I don't think it's out of the question that a whole bunch of building owners, if you get them together, and the Ontario government could ask them all to come together and talk about this in an adult fashion. I don't think it's out of the question that the building owners would say, yeah, that's what we want. But everyone on a level playing field, because we're all competitors, we should all know what everyone's getting into. So that's a quick off the top answer. Maybe someone else says.
I wonder, any comments, Peter?
No, I don't have further comments on that. I'm sure I'll have when you get into other questions.
Okay, I'll watch you nodding if you want to comment. Thank you. So I have a question from Bob Spencer. What do you think about using the 850 Toronto schools as district energy hubs? They are already producing 34 megawatts of solar on their rooftops. So that's to, yeah, Peter and John, go ahead.
I mean, it has the attraction that you're dealing with one entity, the school board. And I mean, it's the same sort of thing with the U of T. The U of T can decide what it does with all of those buildings. So, I mean, that's one plus that makes hopeful progress. It had to be done carefully. I mean, if it was done right, in fact, it would be better, I think, to do it for the whole lot of them, and it would be taken more seriously and studied very, very carefully. Make sure they don't, make any mistakes with whatever they tried to put in. It sounds self-serving because I used to work for a consulting engineer, FEB, but really, you do need to really seriously look at these things, the design of these things, the concept engineering. It's only about 3% of the total project cost. That's where you employ the most senior engineers to really give you an opinion on are you barking up the right tree, so to speak. It has to be done very carefully and very seriously. But I think it has legs on it. The suggestion has legs on it, because in one entity, 800 buildings, it could you could make some progress with that.
Okay, another one that comes to my mind is the and I forget what they're called now, but the zones around transit nodes, which the Ontario government has mandated to be high density. So, there are proposals for skyscrapers near where I live, for example. And so they've already said there's going to be density here. So that would be another example, but maybe I'll go to another question first. So we have a question from Liz. I remember that this group tried to get the city to support a district energy system based on the use of waste heat from nuclear reactors. What is the status of that proposal now? Do you still think it's feasible?
It's going to be a long time coming. Of course, it's feasible. There's 50 nuclear reactors throughout the world supply waste heat, including, supply heat to district heating, including Chernobyl, which Ontario Hydro supported the construction of way back then. To me, that's a very strategic thing. My colleagues, Martin Green and Michael Wigan, have made a lot of progress talking to the Canadian Nuclear Association about this. It's a very strategic, it's a strategic issue. It's looking 10, 15 years down the road because it's going to take that long to build these nuclear plants or refurbish them, whichever way you look at it. And you're not quite sure which way it's going to go. The thing I will say about that is you have to, none of those, in every case, I'm sure the district heating system is built first. You have to build the district heating system first. And so therefore, you need other sources. You need the sources we were talking about, the local sources, and those 30 nodes or whatever. And when you build them out, they eventually connect up together. They sort of branch out organically like trees. This is what happened in Copenhagen, Stockholm, just about everywhere, as far as I know. And so it takes a while to build up a critical mass that could be big enough to connect to a nuke. And then you'll be in a situation where they already have sources, and the nuke would have to be competitive, which it possibly could be. It would have to be competitive on marginal cost, because you still need those original sources to back it up. So, I mean, it's feasible. It's been proven. It's and there are people looking at it. I don't know how long it's going to take. I don't know which type of reactors they would use. I don't know what it will cost. One thing I would say is it will cost the electricity consumers a lot of money, but once they build them, it's good to get the last squeal out of the pig. It's good to get more energy out of them if they've been built for the electricity customer. And electricity prices are going to go. Don't let anyone tell you energy is going to be cheap. It's not. Electricity prices are going up, and the government can't stop it. It's like King Canute trying to stop the tide from coming in. Clean is not cheap. And but if, as a byproduct, it can support decarbonization and give the heat customers an affordable, if it can help keep energy costs down for heating, then it could be a positive move. Maybe other people have different opinions about that. I don't know if Martin would like to comment on that. Where is he? I know he's there.
Well, I don't know that I want to get into this in depth now. I certainly can comment, but maybe we should let the other questions go first, and then if there's a follow-up conversation, then I'm happy to contribute then.
Okay, we'll keep that in mind for sure. We'll go to a question from Mike Green. Toronto has many neighborhoods with single-family homes. What would be the best strategy for bringing district energy to these neighborhoods?
Yeah, we're going to spend a lot of time on that. It's going to be tricky. You may be into what we call fifth generation, even lower temperatures, to be even more efficient and lower the cost of piping and lower the cost of fittings and everything else. The strategy, I don't know. You got to do some. You got to do some modern ones. So there's been. Are we still here? There's, yeah. All I know about single-family homes is we connected about 150 Remington townhomes in Markham, both heating and cooling. But Markham District Energy did. FEB designed it, and it was difficult. We did it. Of course, Markham is an unusual situation where you had Markham Center building out a very high-density, 15-minute type community. And you had a pipe going down the street because of that. So maybe that's a hint. If you started developing those 27 nodes with your high density areas or your transit nodes and things like that, if there's some single family homes around, you could branch out and get them at an incremental cost. Maybe that's one strategy. I think there should be a strategy. There should definitely be a strategy because I'm not sure if they give us half the emissions or something like that, roughly half the emissions. So they have to be dealt with. And I think if you put air source heat pumps in them all, you're going to drive up electricity costs tremendously. So if you put it in all of them, so I think at least some of them, you should try to get waste heat in. But it may be much along the lines of the lower temperature type stuff, which we never liked at FVB, but times change. It could be the situations where you have lower temperatures and still have a heat pump in every building, but it is drawing from a warm water source and not the air. It's got a warm water source, which is just being pumped round and round, and it's been replenished perhaps by cooling. There are books that the IEA has had a research project on this, and there's a huge volume of stuff on our website actually about all of this low density, low temperature stuff. So you could probably find it on our website. People are looking at it, and I'm not sure exactly how much is being done. I'd like to know more about it myself. I see Richard's
Hey,
got his hand up. Oh,
I'm
no, he
gonna go
doesn't.
to
Sorry.
Peter first. I'm gonna go to Peter first, and
Okay, thanks for that, Rose. I haven't seen the studies, John, that you've referenced, and I would say that doing a retrofit on existing construction for single-family dwellings could be problematic. I don't mean the buildings themselves, but the sidewalks, the roads, all the other piping, etc. So far, the approach that I've taken, the NDP has taken, has been informed by a study done by Ralph Torrey and Brendan Haley that investing heavily in making these houses much closer to zero energy consumption and providing them with air source heat pumps would be the cheapest and fastest way to go. And part of what John has raised is quite correct. If you dramatically increase the demand from those buildings, then you have huge cost impact on the electricity system, which is why if you go to mass installation of air source heat pumps, you need mass installation of energy efficiency measures to dramatically cut demand.
okay, I'm going to go to the next question here. Okay, we have a question from Cynthia Locke-Drake. We know that Hembridge, the nuclear industry, etc., are good at lobbying governments. Can you comment on who the industry players are for creating district energy systems and whether they were very well positioned to lobby?
No, we don't have we need to improve our lobbying ability. I mean, that's for sure. There isn't a Canadian District Energy Association anymore. There are a few other organizations like Quest. And the Boltzmann Institute is supposed to be a think tank. We're supposed to be producing information, doing research and producing information. But of course, when we see that the government seems to have a total be totally blind about district energy, we're going to bring it to its attention. But it's a good question. I think the industry needs there needs to be someone speaking from it. You see, we're just a bunch of think tank type people, we're almost like academics, There need to be the industry people, the N-Waves and all the rest. They are part of the International District Energy Association, headquarters in Washington, D.C., and that is supposed to represent the industry to the Canadian government and to the North American and to the US as well. But I'm not. I don't think they'd be doing that effective. Quite honestly, I mean, there's something you should perhaps talk to Carlisle Coutinho about, or Bruce Andrew, one of the operators, because those operators they don't seem to have an industry association. I mean, that's all I can see. I mean, maybe someone else can see
I'm
more than I can.
Thanks, John. I'm going to go to Peter.
Yeah, I have to say, in my almost now 20 years at Queen's Park, I've never had anyone come and lobby for district energy, for district heating. But I have to say, I've seen Enbridge in action, and I've seen the Association of Power Producers, those who develop generation plants, in action. They are very powerful at Queen's Park, profoundly powerful at Queen's Park. And so moving forward is going to be politically difficult. They are going to fight very hard to defend their market share. And the idea of replacing, and I'll just say gas for the moment, with using waste heat from other buildings, man, that is something that they would go crazy about. Richard has asked a question about Bill 165, and I'll get a chance to speak to that later. But anything that even vaguely touches on their market share, they send in the troops.
I was actually going to see if you wanted to address Richard's question now. I didn't know what it was referring to, but go ahead.
Well, very quickly, in December of last year, the Ontario Energy Board that regulates the utilities did something extraordinarily unusual. They actually carried through their mandate to protect consumers and said that those who are customers of Enbridge should not have to pay to subsidize the expansion of the gas network in the years to come. Enbridge is suing them, went out of their minds. In less than 12 hours, the Minister of Energy came out and said that this outrageous decision would not be allowed to stand and that he would bring in legislation effectively allowing them to overturn it, which will mean many billions of dollars in extra charges to Enbridge consumers to pay for the expansion of the gas network. So there are hearings coming up April 8th and 9th. Some people on this call have applied to be speakers at those hearings, and I'll know in a few days, I hope, exactly who's been given the opportunity to speak and who hasn't. But in fact, if we're going to talk about moving past natural gas, moving past fossil fuels, it's going to be very important to defend the energy regulator, who shockingly and unusually, unprecedentedly, has stood up for consumers and the environment.
Peter hasn't answered my question because I haven't asked it yet.
That was my best guess, Richard.
But it is about Bill 165.
Yes.
So we are presenting at 4 o'clock on April the 8th on this during the eclipse. And we don't think the eclipse will be anything to do with it, but we do think that the NDP should be something to do with it. There are 2 members of the NDP caucus on the committee, not yourself, unfortunately.
No, I've been substituted in. I'll be sitting there.
Oh, that's excellent. So I really don't need to ask the question, because we are going to try and shift the discourse towards district energy.
Excellent.
And at that meeting, we have seven minutes to do it, but we will need support from within the caucus. From within the committee. The caucus is dominated by Conservative members, but there are 2 NDP members, of which you're going to be one now, and Mike Schreiner's on it, and we think we stand a good chance of at least shifting some of it to district energy. But what we're going to do is to build on something that we detect is happening within consumers' gas, and that is a move towards district energy. And you might find this surprising, but we've had meetings with consumers' gas, and I wouldn't say there's anything going to come out in an extraordinary way soon, but we know they already have taken baby steps towards this. And what we would like to do would be to make recommendations, which we haven't precisely developed yet, but we have the framework for them, that make it easier for consumers' gas to get past the OMB restrictions into district energy. And we'd very much like your support for that.
Richard, I look forward to seeing the presentation. And you could even send it to me early if you want.
We will send it to you early. We hope to have a first draft on about Tuesday of next week, and we could even send that first draft to you.
Thank you.
Could I just say one more thing while I'm here? That question by Mike Green that came up earlier, I think is one of the most important matters in this whole area, and that is how you shift single-family homes to district energy. And I'm a lot more optimistic than Peter is about this. Peter's been listening to particular experts, maybe a little too strongly. Certainly should listen to them in some way. But I think it's true to say that every place we're going to visit in Europe on the study tour that John mentioned, every place is doing that. It is extending its area of distribution of district energy out further into existing single-family homes. And we want to look at that very carefully to see how they're doing it.
Good.
It's Kyle here. Rose has had a power failure. So our chat moderator is temporarily unavailable. And that was not planned. So I'm not sure kind of where she was in terms of moderating the chat. But I'm just going to put one question forward, and it kind of follows from the last one a little bit, which is, Peter, if you could speak to kind of ways in which we can influence the government other than in the ballot box, because you only get to do that every once in a while. And you had talked about the power of lobbies, but where are other places where we can be effective?
Well, let's say that first off, there's more than one level of government, and having municipalities on your side can be quite powerful. It is not as good as having the provincial or federal government on your side, but having municipal governments on your side, that has had an impact on provincial and federal politics. If we look back to the Greenbelt fight, there was no doubt that having citizens organizations, municipalities, and environmental organizations mobilize and effectively embarrass the government and show that it had no credibility, that allowed us to move forward. It's not entirely clear to me what the route is going to be. I think that political mobilization is going to be the central thing. The exact nature of who's going to be part of that coalition applying pressure is not clear to me at the moment. But I think you're right. You can't just wait for an election to come along. Between elections, people can mobilize and apply pressure.
Thank you. John, did you want to add anything to that? I know that was kind of a government question. You had mentioned the idea, basically, of the industry needing a lobby group. Do you have any other ideas about what citizens can do?
Well, they can be doing what you're doing here, educating themselves and talking to their MPPs and MPs and councillors, getting to know them. I mean, I know my federal MP fairly well because he's a Liberal. I don't get along with my Conservative MPP so well, but just knowing, politicians are human and they do listen to people. I mean, they get a sense of which way is the right way to go from people they interact with. So I think for people to be active in the communities, to talk to their elected representatives is and to be informed about these issues is certainly a good way to go. I mean, we try at the Boltzmann Institute, we try a lot with the staff, but we get the feeling they're not always listening to us, but we're not quite sure why. We just have to kind of improve our methods in that. But in my experience, politicians usually listen, and you get the impression quite often that it is making some impact. In fact, Citizens Climate Lobby actually got the carbon price. I mean, they were played a big role in Canada adopting carbon pricing, and it was because they talked to so many MPs all the time, even though their lobbying efforts were just dwarfed by the oil and gas industry. As Peter said, corporate lobbying has much more power than we have, but even a little bit helps a big deal, I feel. So get to know your elected representatives and let them know what you think.
Okay. And just I wanted to do a quick follow-up. When you say that you talk to the staff and they don't seem quite to understand it, are you saying from the perspective of communicating sometimes it's difficult around terminology or technology?
Oh, I should be careful what I say here. I don't want to upset anyone or insult anyone. You just get the impression that there's a sort of a party line, and they don't want to know. They often. Well, let me give you another example. Instead of me rambling and giving off my own prejudices and problems, I'll tell you some actual things that had happened. One of my colleagues, Michael Wigan, wrote a letter to the Prime Minister of Canada, who saying a lot of the things that I was saying in my presentation, who passed it to the Honourable Wilkinson, who was the Minister of Natural Resources, who passed it to an ADM. And the ADM wrote a letter back, which probably had input from other people in Natural Resources Canada. And it was like 3 pages of boasting how all the great things the federal government were doing. No hint that they'd even noticed one the points Michael had said. And you just got the impression, I know I shouldn't say this, but you got the impression that they were saying, don't try to tell us anything. We already know everything. I mean, that's, I'm just giving you my honest impression of some of these interactions. And I felt that at the provincial level also with the Minister of Energy. So that's a fairly blunt, harsh thing to say, but those are my honest impressions, which I think you were asking for.
Yes, thank you. And I can tell people that Rose is back. Rose, are you able to take over as chat monitor?
I could, but I unfortunately have, since I signed in again, I've lost my chat. So maybe do a few more questions and then if you can.
Okay, sure. Let me just take a look here and see what we have. I think, Mike Green, you had mentioned the possibility of getting tours of places. So you had said like old district energy systems in Baycrest, which people don't know about. Is that something, and I know this is, I guess, kind of a general question, because John, you had mentioned, for instance, you could walk through a parking garage at U of T underneath the circle and be able to see it. And you've planned a cruise for people to see district energy. Do you think that a district energy tour of Toronto might be a good idea?
Well, I think it's always a good idea to educate yourself. I mean, if the host, if they're willing to host you, we've always had good response from Regent Park Energy. It's just a small system, and I mean, it's a third generation as yet. It's based on boilers and chillers. They have some cogeneration units, may be useful for anyone who doesn't even know what a cogeneration unit looked like. And the chillers, like big heat pumps, really. And they have plans, I believe, for geo exchange between the heating and cooling, and they could probably do it. They've always, maybe maybe I'm foisting problems off on my poor friends at Regent Park Energy, but they've always been very welcoming, and they just love showing people. They're in the basement of this huge high-rise building on I think it's Sumac Street, of coal. I think it's got one coal or something. And they just love showing people this energy transfer station that serves the whole building because it's so small. And when people see that, they start to get it. I mean, it's a funny thing. It's a small thing, right? It's a very small thing. But they see just how small and simple this energy transfer station is for that huge, great high-rise building. And they say, this is what you'll have in your building if you have district heating. There's absolutely no trouble at all, just a simple heat exchanger, few control valves, energy meter. And it's really, well, it's small for a big building. They love showing you that. I think they take great pleasure in showing you that. So I'd advise people to bother the people at Richard Park Energy. Uh, I'm sure they'll take you around. They've taken me around with other people several times.
Thank you. I wrote that down. Don, do you have a question that you want to voice to Peter about clean technology investment tax? How's that?
I have two questions for Peter. I don't know if I can ask both at once. The first goes back a little bit earlier in the discussion. Peter, can you, because you've been there, how can we get government to actually listen? I don't know if we're going to get 20,000 people on Queen's Park lawn waving placards and shouting about district energy and thermal energy, but it will improve the lives of more than 200,000 people enormously. How can we get government to actually listen to us in using the means that we have available? Because it's not going to be, well, I don't know. How can we do that effectively?
Well, I have to say governments respond to forces that can put them out of office or keep them in office. And if you can't do either of those things, your ability to influence them is limited. So we are dealing with a government that is not particularly interested in the well-being of Ontarians. It is very interested in getting reelected, and it's very interested in making sure that its friends make fortunes. So do not expect anything from them unless you're actually able to show them that you can damage their electoral prospects. There is no appeal to better angels or to logic. Often I joke with people that I operate in a logic-free, fact-free building. Don, it's simply a question of political power and the ability to make them unhappy. And frankly, that's what happened with the Greenbelt. That's why they moved. But you had a second question.
I do, and I believe Kathy reposted it in the chat. Ironically, a lobbyist from a very, very conservative lobbyist firm told me about legislation that the Liberals have moved partway through the process of clean technology, the clean technology investment tax. It's a refundable tax credit of 30%, and it applies, among other things, to ground source heat pumps. I've asked to have a conversation with Nathaniel Erskine-Smith, my MP, about the details surrounding this tax to make sure that it doesn't just apply to the pump, that it would apply to the whole system, boreholes and everything else that's required to make it work. I said, from reading the rest of the bill, it looks like that's the case because there's a large labor component involved. I'm just looking for ideas on if this is actually passed into law, how might it be used? Because 30% is a lot of money.
If the question is directed at me, I'll be honest, Don, I'm not familiar with the bill, so I can't say exactly how it will be used. We're in a pre-election period. The Liberals are vulnerable. So if there's any opportunity to make things rain, now is the time. And if you and others believe that the bill actually will advance the expansion of renewable energy, clean energy, then mobilizing in key ridings could in fact have an impact on government decision making. But I haven't seen the bill. I don't know about its background, so I can't give you any more information than that.
There's a link in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, Don, and sorry about my unexpected exit. And thank you very much, Kyle, for stepping in. I see that Martin has his hand up, and I'll get to you in a moment, but I just wanted to, we were 5 minutes out, and I'm wondering if people, because of some of the disruptions, if people are open to staying a little bit longer, say 10 or 15 minutes. Peter and John, is that something you'd be interested in?
Yeah, I can go to about 10 after 9. That gives us another 15 minutes. Sure.
Okay,
Yeah,
thanks very much.
no problem.
So, thank you. I'll just go to Martin. You're on mute. There we go. Thank you.
So there's a whole bunch of stuff that's been interesting, and I'd like to comment. I'll try and keep it as brief. One of the challenges we face is, I'll just say, a lack of understanding or information about district energy systems and the costs and viability. I think it comes primarily from the fact that we don't have much in Canada. We've got small district energy systems that are established to feed dense cores where you've got a high heat load, and typically most often this is for new buildings, and there's then a perception that that's all that will really work. I did a quick calculation again looking at the U of T field, the one that John showed under the front campus, and that geothermal field, if that was installed under our local high school playing field, which would be entirely viable, the cost of that was about $15 million, that the U of T's field. By my calculations, it would be enough to serve about 5,000 homes. So that's about $3,000 per home. Putting in the piping and so on is going to cost more. There's other components that need to go in. But if you compare the cost of implementing district energy for a suburban neighborhood, it's probably about a quarter of the cost of doing building retrofits, installing air source heat pumps, upgrading the electric power system. We'd have to replace the entire distribution grid, and we'd also need more transmission and more generation to be able to power those heat pumps. So it's an entirely doable thing. And if you look at, well, you have to put pipes under the roads and all of that. Well, we have a buried electrical system, and our local buried electrical system would have to be completely replaced if you were going to go the air source heat pump route. It's 60 years old, and it would need roughly triple the capacity that it has. So you'd be looking at digging up all the streets, replacing all the wires, replacing the services into all of the houses. It's actually a much more complicated endeavor than installing the district heating system. District heating pipes are shallow buried. They're pre-insulated. They go above the other utilities. So it's actually not a difficult thing to do. And it's done many places. So the perception that, well, we couldn't possibly do that with existing neighborhoods, I think is based on a lack of knowledge, understanding, and a lack of seeing this. And what we really need is to have good demonstrations done. We need to sort of take neighborhoods and say, okay, we're going to do this. This neighborhood of 1,000 homes or more, we're going to deploy this. But part of what you need is to be able to say, not just we're putting the pipes in, but we're going to convert the whole neighborhood. We don't want to have a situation where we have to gradually entice people to join on to this. It has to be something where you've got a customer base, so you don't have every third or fourth home connected, but you've got every home connected. That's part of the challenge we're looking at. Now I'll flip quickly to the nuclear side. We have worked with a very good collaboration with a number of people in the nuclear sector, some very senior people like John and I, mostly retired, not all, but mostly retired. And they're doing this because they see it's important, and they've understood that thermal networks are really critically important for Canada. And they're bought more into the concept of thermal networks than they have to the concept of nuclear with thermal networks. But not that they're ruling that out, but they see it as a long-term effort because of all the social license issues and the fact it takes a long time to build a nuclear station. But we are gaining support across the nuclear industry and beyond that at a very senior level with people that do have direct influence on government at the senior level. And so that's the other way in which we can have influence, rather than going as a grassroots thing, getting thousands of people talking to their MPs. If we can get trusted people talking to leaders in government, then that's another way of having an influence. So we're working on that angle as well. But there's great potential.
Thanks. I think I was going to go to a question from Liz because I've heard this question come up a lot, but I think you've partially answered it. Her question is, with existing systems, she mentioned West Bank Mirvish development of Bathurst and Bloor, they have, whether it's geothermal or the beginnings of district energy, how do you expand to the surrounding neighborhoods? You've answered that by saying, well, we need the whole neighborhood to get on board, like rather than onesie twosies. Anything to add to that?
That's the key thing. I think we need the political support to do that. In other words, I think that there would be funding available to help with this, whether it's from FCM or other sources where there are organizations that are recognizing we need to undertake this transition. But doing this sort of thing, it's not just a demonstration, it's a research project. All right, because we haven't done it before, so you're going to learn from it. If we don't do that first community, then how are we going to do the second, third, fourth, and the 1,000th community? We have to learn and make mistakes and correct those mistakes, find the better way of doing it. And so we have to have some understanding, first of all, that this is viable. And so we need to have good communications with the politicians to develop that understanding. And then we need to have that commitment that says, okay, we're going to try some experiments. I'll address, there was Lee, I think, asked the question about what's going to happen with Drake Landing. I don't know if everyone knows about this. This is a community in Alberta, Okotoks, that's heated by solar thermal panels with a geo-exchange field that stores the heat during the summer. It's about 25 years old, and some of the components are nearing end of life. And so they're talking about, well, are we just going to shut it down and convert to gas furnaces now? We've been discussing that, pursuing some of the people who've been involved in this in NRCan and elsewhere to see whether we can't, deal with this, because like any system you put in, if you own a condo, whatever, you've got a plan for doing major component replacement over time. When a system's 25 years old, you're going to have to expect that you're going to need to do some replacement of components. And so rather than just shutting it down, we think that it should be rejuvenated, new technology, and let's keep it going. It's world famous. It would be a terrible shame to see it shut down. So.
I see another question here. Thank you, Martin. Is the city committee of the 9 largest, this is from Bob Spencer, by the way, it's a private question. Is the city committee of the 9 largest property owners still meeting? I think it may be called Toronto 2030. Could this group that includes U of T, the 2 school boards, the regional hospitals, Greenwind Real Estate Investment Trust, be lobbied about district energy? Anyone? John, Peter, any thoughts?
I don't know, but it sounds it would sound like useful committee to get to know, because as I said, I think I said it earlier that I don't see it beyond question by any means that all those big corporate people, real estate people, will realize that it's in their interests. They're the ones who are going to benefit, because it's an enormous cost to them to decarbonize whichever way they do it. Unless they hook up to, and if they hook up to, well, this was in my presentation, wasn't it? The district energy people can do it a lot cheaper. They can get lower cost financing, and if they know they're going to connect them all up, the corporate people will get a good deal. I seem to remember, Peter and Richard have got backgrounds in deep lake water cooling, but I was in New Business Ventures at the time in Ontario Hydro. I seem to remember we had insight to BOMA, the Building Owners and Managers Association, who told us that, yeah, we want deep lake water cooling. We'll sign up for it. We'll go for it. But there was no one who put it forward at that time. It was resurrected later, thanks to Metro Water and TDAC. But yeah, these building people are quite capable of getting together and say, yes, we want this. Go ahead. We'll put out a request for expressions of interest. And you can say in that we, the building owners or whatever group it is, we are very much in favor of this. And you can send that all over the world, and folks like Vattenfall will look at this, and they'll take it very, and Enwave, of course, they'll take it very seriously and put in serious expressions of interest, which could encourage maybe. I won't say any more about the city, but I'm just saying that these building people could definitely help get the thing going and encourage a request for expressions of interest, perhaps from the city, perhaps help the city, nudge the city along to put out a request for expressions of interest, because the city could have equity without putting up hardly any cash. Just they've already got equity. They're allowing them to use the rights of way in the roads. The city is essential to the development of district systems, and so they don't need to put up any cash. There's plenty of people who will put up the cash, but some of these things, like FCM was mentioned, that loan money, but to municipalities and partners of municipalities. And the municipality can be a minority partner, and they can still get FCM funding. I believe now. I think Richard knows more about this than I do, because he used to be president of FCM. But there's a lot of things the municipalities could do, and I think the conglomerate, the groups of big business owners, corporate, could encourage the city if we talk to them right. And we're hoping to talk to them. We've got a couple on our board, actually.
Thank you so much.
Reason.
Thank you so much, John. I'm going to ask Bob Spencer to make one comment about the 2030 group, and then we'll go to close. I'm so thankful for all the discussion. Bob, would you like to make your comment? I think he knows more about this group than many of us. Okay. Is Bob still with us?
Yes, but he's muted.
Oh, great. Thanks. Just by coincidence, I'm really glad I came tonight. Yuri Skopek, who's the vice chair of the North American 2030 group, is presenting to the TDSB in May about a project that he'd originally presented to Toronto, which went nowhere because of the ministry, that he managed to convince an American area, Santa Clara group, to look at schools as not just district energy, but also emergency centers, because in Santa Clara, of course, they have floods and tornadoes and everything else. And I suppose, given what's happening with climate change, we'll have that too. But it really corresponds very strongly with what Martin was saying. The 5,000 acres that the Toronto District School Board owns actually could probably look after the heating and cooling of the entire city. It's not as impossible as one thinks. It's an attitudinal change. And I can tell you that at the local level, everyone is massively excited about, if not reopening the 2030 Toronto group, at least setting up something to just use the public buildings that we have already. And the 250 Catholic schools are already interested too. So that would take 850 small nodes, most of them spread very much through residential areas. And in some cases, beside the huge condo towers that are being built, also have small schools. So I think this is not an impossible concept. So if perhaps even if you'd share your sides, John, I'd be happy to share them with Yuri. The poor guy was my neighbor, and now he's vice chair of the 2030 group across North America. So I'd love to be able to share some of this data and see if it could go somewhere, because it's a really good idea whose time has come.
Thanks so much, Bob. I think I'm going to pass it over to Dawn to say our thank yous and bring us into the close.
I'd like to thank everybody for coming out today. Apologize for the bobbles at the beginning, and thank you for sticking with us. I'd like to thank the other members of the committee who put in long hours to organize this, the previous two seminars, and we'll put in more hours in the seminars to come. That's Rose and Kyle, and I'd like to thank Kathy for keeping calm, cool, and collected always, regardless of what's going on. I'd also like to thank the roughly 100 people who I expect will watch this after we're finished and after we put it up on YouTube. The other seminars have each had something over 100 viewers after the fact. So stay tuned. There are other seminars to come. I should say that this seminar marked an important juncture in this series, because we've begun talking about not only what we should do, but how we might actually accomplish it. And well, that's important. So thank you very much. Have a good evening, everyone.
I also want to thank our speakers, Peter and John. Thank you very much.
Oh my goodness.
And thank you, Dawn.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone but, I apologize.
No, it was a great pleasure. Thank you. It was a really good evening.
Thank you for coming out.
Likewise.
Thank
All right.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye all.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
All right. Bye for now.
Thanks again,
for
John.
joining us.
You're welcome.
Holy jumping.
Shall we close and start another meeting?
Yeah, let's do that. Which link shall we use?
Oh, 1 second. Sir, I just want to save the chat. I want to say, I have to stop the recording. Oh my gosh.